So we had Manzanar box 11, and for our final project, we were interested in mapping out the incident locations of each type of report we encountered. So we worked with three sort of report templates. They were the crime reports, lost and found, and casualty reports. And we were just curious to see what patterns might emerge if we mapped out where each incident happened based on their type of report. So we ended up creating three different maps, one for each type of report. And we used maps of the Manzanar camp made available by the National Park Service, which admittedly wasn't the perfect map to use, as the one we used is from 1944 and our cases are from 42. However, this was sort of like the clearest image we could get that was from a reliable source. We also referred to Densho's way more detailed demo map that was shared with us in this class. And that's a more dynamic sort of program that we wouldn't have been able to sort of add to ourselves, but it was very helpful as a reference throughout. So the program we used to create these maps, which we were essentially putting pins on a map, we used Canva, which we both used just doing like graphic design jobs, like social media stuff. And basically it's easy to layer images there and leave little comments on things in case we wanted to indicate the specific cases with the different pinpoints. Later in this presentation, we're also going to talk about sort of more sophisticated programs we might have used if given the time to, really work on learning how to use them. And in some cases, having the monetary resources to use them. So we're going to first start with just doing a brief overview of Manzanar Box 11.
Yeah, so just recap basically what we've been telling you all semester. So at this point in time, which was 1942, there were about 10,000 people interned in the camp, and you can definitely see like the high volume of cases per day reflects this. A majority of the cases were confiscation and sometimes return of contraband, or they are lost and found cases or requests to leave the camp. The lost and found cases have their own individual card type, but the requests don't, and instead are written up on crime cards. So a request to leave the camp was automatically criminalized on the crime cards. It's very clear going through the reports that there is little to no standardization, and it's not surprising that so many non-criminal cases would be lumped together under one single crime report type. However, when we also consider discussions we've had on the importance of terminology in regards to these camps, such as calling them like concentration camps versus internment camps, we might consider how criminalizing language and standards might have been, if not deliberate, a means of control by the WRA and the US government. Terminology and how we describe things have power not only in the moment, but in the archive as well.
So this basically might not have just been sort of like an oversight or laziness, but more deliberate action.
And from the linking project, we learned how not every lost and found case had a corresponding incident card. And for this project, we took into account the importance of lost and found items, especially when considering people who were forced to leave their homes and much of their belongings behind. We mapped out lost things across the camp and tallied those mentioned, which were lost along the way. And I will pull up the pie charts. So we'll just bring our pie charts back. So we had a types of card pie chart and a type of case, which was more of a classification pie chart. And we decided to not map our incidents based on the classification because of that lack of standardization. And a lot of the case types that we had came up only once or twice.
And they were like very random things like jacket or fountain pen in the case of something being lost. So it wouldn't really make that much sense in a data visual. All right, so in terms of our process, we first just wanted to get a better understanding of what Manzanar actually looked like. We'd, been looking at these reports all semester, but we didn't really have a visual in our heads for, where things were happening. Instead, we just had sort of detached words. So this is the map that we worked with. As you can see, the residential blocks, which sets the majority of the map. And then there are also like workspaces, police department. This is a pretty detailed map, but the one on Densho is a little bit more detailed. But did you want to show that one?
Yeah, I can show that. Just going to show you guys the Densho map. I know Jeff Rowe went over it a little bit. Let's see if we just... Okay. No, we want the camp layout.
Yeah, we did.
Okay. So the Densho map was really helpful in figuring out exactly where things were. So they actually have these individual points like mapped out. So you can see like the Buddhist church, specific parts of the hospital over here, the children's village. And we were able to figure out which specific blocks, like the high school and the elementary school and different specific buildings that are referenced in our cases were actually located using this map. So, go back there.
Yeah. And I will also mention that we looked at the breakdown of the different blocks. So that's sort of this picture here, which was also provided by the National Park Service. So for each of our reports, we kept seeing these sort of 3-digit numbers, and those actually have a meaning behind them in terms of like residences location and incidence location. So those are the block, the barrack, and then the apartment. And we did some reading on just like how many people were in each of these blocks. So you've got about 200 to 300 people living per block. And then you've got like families divided into like apartments and stuff. So you've got a lot of people living in tight spaces, sharing. There was a men's bathroom and a women's bathroom. And so they're sharing all these spaces together. And that's sort of where we're seeing all of these incidents happen, as we discussed later, many of the incidents and lost and found cases happen in these residential areas. In terms of the logistics of our arrangement, so we decided to map things out by incident location and type of card. Those are sort of the two metadata categories that we pulled. And we counted these and sort of clustered matching terms together using OpenRefine, just like sort of very briefly using that to just help us organize things and clean things up a little bit, because when we opened up our spreadsheet, it was just a lot to deal with, a lot to arrange. So OpenRefine was very useful in that case. So we've been through these two maps, and so now we've got like a better idea of just what everything looks like. And so from there we started putting pins on our map. So this is our sort of first data visualization.
So this is the visual for the crime reports in our box. As you can see in this pink, I'm pointing and you guys can't see me pointing at it. The pink arrow here on the left is pointing out warehouse 1, which kind of, or the warehouse area in general, which kind of gets covered up by the numerous pinpoints on it. I believe there were about 30, I don't have the number on the top of my head, but there were about 30 individual cases that took place at the warehouse, but the majority of those reports were contraband. As people's luggage was stored in the warehouses. Sometimes, they had a radio or a chef's knife or something like that that was considered contraband. The remainder of the cases are pretty spread out. There's a lot down here on the bottom at the police station. I left a little dot over here. It was just the location was marked as 2 miles past Tower 5. So it's just sort of hanging out in space here. And then this one at the hospital was one of those miscellaneous public assistance cases. So it wasn't actually a crime. It was someone left the hospital without actually being discharged, and a report was filed because of that.
And we just wanted to leave a sort of comment there to show sort of what an ideal sort of searching tool would look like, where you would have a pinpoint that had metadata attached to it. Something that you can do on Canva itself, but it's not something that you can copy over to a PowerPoint like this. It's not downloadable, unfortunately. We also, in terms of the contraband cases, just returning to this idea of criminalization, a lot of the things that were taken were like knives, hatchets, cleavers, and because they were wrapped up in these crime cases, you sort of think of them as weapons, when in reality, these were tools being used for labor. We see in some of the cases actually requests being filed to have these returned like to the kitchen so that they can use the knives. So it's just sort of like these cards are sort of altering the vocabulary that we see, the type of cards being used. So the next type of card was the lost and found reports. So here we put the pins down for all of the ones that basically the location was indicated and the location was actually in the camp. So there were several that were actually outside of the camp. Two in particular were the person who had lost an item were traveling from Montana to Manzanar. So obviously we couldn't put that on the map, but we did want to mention that here because of the sort of transitory nature of these lost and found reports. And then in terms of other patterns, we see most of the items lost in residential blocks. As I discussed before, we've got a ton of people crowded into these small spaces, and they're frequently actually losing items in the showers or the lavatories, which were shared among everyone in the individual blocks. So you can imagine how things would get lost quite easily in those spaces. I also probably should have mentioned this before, but some of these blocks that, for example, block 7 is sort of identical to the residential blocks. It's actually like the high school. And then we also have like an elementary school. I think it's 28, I could be wrong, but we kept sort of seeing like these things where people would lose things between different blocks, and just from laying them out on the map, we were able to see the routes that they were taking, and understand that, someone was walking from the high school back home and that's where they dropped something. And just from reading the cards, we weren't able to really understand that, but once we mapped it out, we were able to identify their route, and we sort of were able to examine the activity in the camp. Our final type of report was far more sparse. These are the casualty reports. We had 3 in total throughout our couple hundred cases. In one case, we have a dog bite, and just from mapping this, these stray dogs that were loose in the camp, it indicates in the report there were multiple dogs. They were in residential areas. We also see 2 traffic-related accidents, one causing property damage and one in which an individual fell off a truck. I will also note that within our the expanse of the entire box, we did see 2 cases of dog bites, but only one of them was listed as a casualty report, while the other was a crime report. So again, we're seeing this lack of standard, but also this sort of criminalization. All right, in terms of our just sort of concluding page.
So why is this useful? So we wanted to map out incident locations because it gives us a more dynamic view of the data on Manzanar. We get to see activity and travel in the maps where people were walking, working, learning, losing items. And these communities are also people who have been forced from their homes, forced to leave much of their lives behind. And we can see, especially in the lost and found cards, the items that were important to them, and the continuation of loss, especially with the number of items that were lost during travel, so they can't even be mapped in the camps themselves. And it's also a way of placing people's activity in an actual tangible location that we can see, rather than having them remain solely attached to a barrack and apartment number that they were assigned to on paper.
And then in terms of like next steps, how we might make this a little bit more of a sophisticated data visualization tool, we did do a little bit of exploring of sort of other programs that might be used. One that really stood out to us was Omeka, which is an online exhibit managing tool, has this plugin called Neatline. It basically allows you to create interactive maps. And so you can plot out information on maps to sort of represent, it's like to represent geospatial information, and with the use of a programming API, it allows customization of sort of the functions of the map layer. We investigated this a little bit, but sort of came to the conclusion that we couldn't really learn how to do this in a week or a couple weeks. So instead, we sort of did a bare bones version of this, sort of what we would like to see on a more sophisticated program. Like the previous group, we also looked at Tableau, which they're a data visualization company that one of the visuals that they supply is one that allows you to geocode map locations automatically. We were specifically looking at heat maps in this case, which you can create using Tableau, and they sort of measure the density of sort of whatever information that you're measuring. In this case, it would be the density of activity in specific locations. And then in terms of just other general improvements that we might make, being able to click on the points and having like information come up would be fantastic to actually be able to like search through the cases and have information attached to the points and not just have these sort of blobs of data, which themselves, the patterns themselves are useful, but it's also nice to have identifying factors associated with the points. And then we've talked a lot about how so much information is thrown under the category of crime cards. And we were sort of thinking like, if we were to refine this project a bit more, we might divide crime cards into a standard that we set ourselves. So dividing them into requests, contraband, especially because that came up so many different times. There were a couple of battery cases, theft, so just sort of creating more categories so we're not lumping together all these cards that clearly don't really belong together. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.